We'll find it as we go.
We'll figure out where we're going. Yeah. I'm trying to think if I had any topics that hit me. I was kind of thinking about it last night, and I mean, there's always shit that happens every week that either perturbs me or, or it entices me to like dig a little deeper. I
Mm-hmm.
guess I got a quick thing we can start
Yeah.
out with if you want. I had a buddy of mine. He has been having a lot of so for those of you that know that have listened to this, I'm a chiropractor. I'm doing quotation marks for those who are listening.
Is
But
a
I,
doctor.
I well, witch doctor. But I kind of do a little bit of everything. Like I've done, um, I do a lot of sports performance stuff, but I also do quite a bit of like lab stuff sometimes. Like when my buddies ask me for information on like reading labs, because I run mine fairly often and I know what a lot of that kind of means. And I do have a lot of education on like human biochemistry and the physiology of like how the body works as far as neurotransmitters and things like that. And my buddy in Arizona had been having like a tons of fatigue, or he'd peak and valley. So he could only be like way up or way down as far as his energy levels went. He did one of those genetic cheek swabs. And I was like, we'll see, kind of whatever this is, right? Gets back this huge report, right? And it's basically that he can't digest or he can't get rid of or go through his catecholamines or his neurotransmitters. You get what I'm saying? So he'll get an
Mm-hmm.
influx, like his body will have like a dopamine dump, and then he'll be on the dopamine dump for hours versus just that nice little hit of like, that was nice, back to normal. That was nice, back to normal. It's like this, like, oh, this is great. And then he'll crash. So he's very
Isn't
similar to
that
you.
isn't that ADHD? I mean, isn't dopamine dysregulation just what ADHD is?
Right. But his is, I think you could file his more as like an adrenal fatigue thing,
Mm.
just because it's like he can't regulate any of the catecholamines. So any of those neurotransmitters, he has a bad job. He does a bad job of like regulating those things. So he gets
Mm.
back this long report, right? And it has all of the breakdowns of what the actual like neurotransmitter words are. And it's just a lot of information. Like unless you're in the healthcare field or you're like us who have read quite a bit of research on like how that works,
Yeah.
you could pay $700 or thousands of dollars for this genetic test and it'll mean nothing to you. Which I was like, this is so dumb. Like, why would you offer this service? But then I was like, okay, I get why they offer this service is so that you
Mm-hmm.
call in, talk to them, they can charge you for the consult, and then charge you for the supplements they want to give you. There were 32 supplements listed on this piece of paper that this guy was supposed to
Interesting.
take. And I was like, dude, what if you just like worked on the stuff that's free, like your sleep, how you train, when you drink your coffee, do some like meditation to help level you out when you're high or do something to help get you up when you're low. And he goes, well, isn't this genetic thing? Like, isn't this what I'm going to be because it's my genetic testing? He's like, no, this just means you're predisposed to it. It doesn't mean that
Mm-hmm.
it is what you are. Like you aren't destined to be this way your whole life. You can change. I mean, look at you're a fantastic example of this. I didn't mean to pick on you about this. It was just anecdotally like this. It's funny because of just the way that it was structured. Like the information was so incomprehensible unless you had somebody to like pull it apart
Mm-hmm.
for you. It's useless. But he's a lot like you. Like you used to be way worse than you are now, as far as
Mm-hmm.
like how rampant or like how manic depressive. um,
Uh,
but
who,
then
me?
you
That doesn't
no.
sound right.
But then it got like I don't know. I was impressed by how in depth like the breakdown of what each individual thing would correlate to as far as like why you would take the supplement and what the goal was. That was kind of
Mm-hmm.
impressive, but I was
Mm-hmm.
not impressed with like the recommendations on like the things that are easier to control, like your diet and your exercise and your sleep. Like
Mm-hmm.
there was little to no direction on
Yeah.
that, which was, I don't know. Either way.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I have a few thoughts, I think, on this. First of all, well, I'm going to do sort of like a compliment sandwich to this whole thing
Yep.
because, so first of all, I'm very bullish on like telehealth.
Yeah.
Like, I think remote medicine, categorically, what that is going to be an awesome industry. It's going to be huge and it's going to be a net positive for a ton of people
Mm-hmm.
because it's going to provide access to people it's access to things that people otherwise didn't have in the past, because either they didn't live in an immediate area where there was that type of practitioner, or they were unaware of it entirely because it wasn't being sort of advertised to them the way that telehealth can advertise to them, and then it gets in front of them and they're like, oh, I can get my blood work done. I can drive to this lab place, get my blood work, mail it in, and then they send me back this information, and then I can get on a FaceTime call with somebody and make sense of it. Plenty of people out there are willing to pay the high price for that, and that's great. Now, with that said, there's definitely a very like obvious game they're playing where it's, do the blood work.
Sorry, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
My microphone apparently is. I'm just using the microphone on the computer. So Levi, sorry, I don't know why it's doing that, but either way,
Levi.
Levi.
So there's an obvious game they're playing where it's like, do the blood work, get the like sort of diagnosis, and then turn around, sell you the solution, right? Mm-hmm. Which is fine, right? It's not. I don't feel like it's that slimy if you are selling them nutritional supplements. Like, there's worse things, right?
Right.
But it's clear that that's what's going on there, right?
Yeah.
Now, with that said, I hope that if you pay them for like a consult, I would hope that the consult would include the advice around like lifestyle changes and things like that. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I do think that it's nice for people to get the simplified version of like, this supplement is for that. This supplement is for that, right? And sometimes you get over like, because really that's not the case. Like, every supplement is for like multiple things.
Yeah.
But most people just don't care that that's the case. They're like, well, I want outcome A. What supplement can I take to get that outcome out of my body? And it's like, well, creatine, for example. Like, we know creatine has like a whole host of benefits. It's like, it's good for sports performance. It's good for cognitive performance. It's good for immunity. But most people are like, what's good for workout performance? Creatine. All right, cool. That's enough information for them. They're just happy with that, right? They don't even need to know, nor do they care about the rest of that stuff. And when you're trying to when you're trying to hit sort of mass market people, that's plenty for most of those people. But it's really interesting, like, looking at what you were predisposed to. I was just talking about this recently, how I heard on a different podcast, this person was a guest on it, and he's like an entrepreneur type, tech entrepreneur, and he was saying that he believes that in the next 50 to 100 years, making babies the old-fashioned way is going to be a thing of the past. He thinks everybody is going to start, he thinks IVF and gene manipulation is going to become so commonplace that it's going to be the norm. Because it's becoming a lot more like accurate, accessible, like lots and lots of people do IVF and things of that nature, and things like CRISPR gene editing and things like that are also progressing. And he thinks as those two things progress sort of alongside each other, they're going to collide. And what you're going to have is lots and lots of people are going to be gene editing their offspring. And it's going to be
your offspring.
They're going to, if you have a family history of heart disease, they're going to go in there and they're going to manipulate that gene so you're not predisposed to it. If you have a family history of substance abuse, they're going to go and find the dopamine dysregulation gene, and they're going to manipulate that. My opinion is that I have a little bit more of a dystopian view of that. Like, I actually think he's kind of right. I do think that it's going to be very commonplace, but what I think is going to happen is it's going to be the haves and the have-nots. Like, I think it's going to be expensive and it's elective. And what I think we're at risk of seeing is literally like a Elysium of the rich people who are quite literally genetically superior because they're gene editing their offspring. And every person who comes from wealth is going to be 6'6", blue-eyed, jacked, perfect health, no genetic mutations, no
Everyone's going to be,
cancer, no heart disease.
yeah.
And then down here in the slums, you're going to have all the rest of us that have made our babies the old-fashioned way by
I'm a
humping.
slumlord. I'm a slumlord. Keep me in the slums, baby. It's where I belong.
And I think about that, and I'm like, oh no,
Yeah.
But in the
Yeah.
meantime,
It's a cool
in the
idea.
meantime, cool idea, good businesses, And
Um,
I think that the genetic testing and stuff is all really really fascinating to learn about and dive into.
I agree. So like my my whole point on that was the fact that it was the lowest hanging fruit in making definitive change are levers you can pull, right? Like things you can like really control. Because just taking a supplement, like you hit the nail on the head, right? Like it is nice to know that like taking zinc will help make you more calm. Or generally that's why people take it. It's also good for your brain and it does a lot of things. But in this case, it was like it'll help regulate, just like you with L-theanine. L-theanine helps you regulate better, right? Whereas like L-theanine
Mm-hmm.
makes me sleep a lot harder. So it's like I wouldn't take it during the day because I don't have a problem focusing. But to go to bed, it's really nice. So
Mm-hmm.
the point is that I'm a big fan of like, and it's the same thing in sports performance. Tell me if I'm wrong here. If you manipulate everything, you don't know what you're manipulating. You need to pull on levers individually. You can't just like, you can't slam all the levers down and be like, all right, everything's working. Because we have no idea what we're doing, right? And it's the same thing if we're looking at it genetic expression wise, right? Gene expression, if we're looking at what genes do as far as what they predispose, a lot of it is habitual in
Mm-hmm.
humans for the things that we see expression of that are not genetic, like that are not sorry, I don't know why I said that, that are not physical, like things that
Mm-hmm.
are like your skin color. You're like, this is not habitual. My hair is not habitual. This is just what it is. I was born like
Mm-hmm.
this. Like this is where I was headed from the second I took my first breath, or the second
Mm-hmm.
I grew my second cell. I duplicated. But the other parts I do think are like how you form your habits and how you function and like how you think about things. And some of that is nature versus nurture, but there is always that like, it's like the leaning tower pizza, right? You're always going to tip towards what you were made from.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree with you on the IVF thing. And I do think it is like, you know, it is, it's one of those things that they're like talking about politically as far as like allowing IVF to be like a thing that's accessible to everybody because of how hard
Mm-hmm.
it is for people to get pregnant in the current society and things like that. And it's, I think there's one thing like my wife and I are going through it. We're working through stuff, right? Because we're trying to have a kid. And you just think like when you're younger, you think you look at a girl wrong and you're going to get her pregnant. And it's not how it works. There are like certain times of the month that you have to be like in the pocket to hit the number, to get the right, you got to get the right guy, and the right one's got to swim all the way through the stuff, and the things have to be dropped at the right time. And there's a whole thing to it. You can't just go, you can't just whisper, I like you. And then child, whereas like when we're young, like when you're younger,
I
tell me that
know.
isn't
I know.
exactly the perception. You're
Dude,
like, you just like,
I
I looked at this girl and I don't know what happened, man. She's pregnant.
dude, the more you learn about doing it on purpose,
Yeah.
the more you feel like, how the hell does this ever happen on accident?
How does this work? And then I think the biggest thing is like you look at, this is going to be a broad generalization, but you look at the accidental children, and a lot of times it's like somebody who's smoking cigarettes and drinking beer and like completely unhealthy, and they're like, "Yep, having a kid,"
Yeah.
and then you get
Got
like
pregnant.
you get this really healthy. They're down in the slums with us. They're humping it out, But but it's like it's such a strange thing because it is like if we're going back to the topic of this, the genetic part, you can't control how this is going to happen to you.
Mm-hmm.
You can't. As much as it sucks, it's the same thing as like anything in life. You can't like you can try and be a Zach Elder and force your will upon the world, but really, all you can do is put your best foot forward and be like, hopefully, I don't get shit on by a bird today, and just keep moving forward. But I do think it will go that way. I do think gene editing is going to become a big thing. I do think that. I don't think in our lifetime though. You and I will be dead in the dirt. We'll be gone. Maybe our next
Mm-hmm.
kids. Maybe our kids' kids, maybe our grandchildren
Yeah.
might have that, but we won't.
our grandchildren's children will be edited. They're going to be preventing
I should put that in my will.
genetic predispositions.
I should put that in
Like-
my will. No twangies will ever be edited. They're not allowed to be edited. You have to fight through it. You have to fight through it like we did. You have to be a regular person.
You need to have the Indiana tap water in your blood.
Did you like? Man. I did. I was serious the other day. My dad coached the guy who was the Italian beef and Italian sausage king of Chicago.
Oh yeah, you know what? I forgot. That reminds me. I didn't click that link that you sent because I wanted to do it on the pod.
No way.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought read this.
This will be good content.
Read this, and then I have a quick story of when I was like 5 and the interaction I saw at Scala Beef in the south side of Chicago. So read that first.
All right. So as an aside, let me frame this. So for a listener, Alex is the king of weird random name dropping, and I don't mean like sort of douchey name dropping where like people. I was gonna say everybody knows a guy like this. Everybody probably doesn't, but like I know other people like this that do sort of douchey name dropping where they like know pro athletes and they'll like name drop pro athletes, or they'll be like, yeah, I was hanging out with Patrick the other day, and you're like, Patrick? And you're like, oh, Mahomes? Yeah, you know him. Like, come on, man. Like,
don't be a douche.
Alex does weird name dropping. Like, you'll be talking to him, and we'll be like, yeah, man, I love Italian food. And he'll be like, oh, yeah, I like Italian food too. Did you know I knew the Italian beef king of Chicago? Like, fucking what? Oh, what's that? You need some sod? I got a sod guy. I know the guy that grows all the sod south of Sioux Falls. Like, what? Fucking what? Yeah.
Indiana tap water, man.
Yeah. Anyway, so we're texting with a college buddy of mine that has become good friends with Alex as well, and Alex is like, yeah, I knew the Italian beef king of Chicago. What? So, and then he sends this link. So he says, Pat Scala. Look him up.
Scala.
Pat Scala. Look him up. And sends this link. And the title of this link is Whatever Happened to Scala Meatpacking? And this is a website called pizzamaking.com. It's a forum. God bless the internet. Anybody who follows the inner workings and history of the local Chicago Italian meat business is the first line. Yeah, anybody who follows that.
Hey, if you're in Chicago, that's a big part of Chicago culture, all right? You wouldn't get it, you northerner.
So it says, Pasquale Scala is often given credit for inventing the Chicago-style Italian roast beef sandwich in 1925.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the Scala family became a premier Chicago supplier of their wonderful Italian sausage for pizza. Okay, so this guy was writing this, grew up in Chicago in the 50s to 70s, and he now lives in Colorado. But he still strives to make the perfect Chicago pizza. And he remained a customer of the Scala Meatpacking Company until their ultimate demise a few years ago.
Yeah.
This guy says, I have written Pat Scala and the Scala agents several times for recipe hints, and the letters come back undeliverable. Yep. I've also tried several dozen times to duplicate their taste from scratch, but have completely failed at coming even close to the taste that I grew up with. So here are questions for this group. Out of personal interest, does anybody know what happened to Pat Scala, the family, and or their business?
Luckily for this guy,
they exist somewhere under a different name on a limited basis where I can contact them to buy product. This guy grew up in the 50s to 70s. So this dude's like in his late 60s. Just wants to get that taste. There's a parenthesis here that says that their demise was over issues related to family pride and commitment to product excellence rather than issues that typically cause a company to close their doors. What does that even mean?
This is all true. This is all true.
Is this an organized crime thing? This has got to be an organized crime thing.
I have a story for you. so so my dad was the head coach. For those of you who have listened, my dad was the head coach at Valparaiso University for 20 years. So Valparaiso is approximately like in 45 minutes, an hour southeast of Chicago. If there's no traffic, you can get to Wrigley in like 45 minutes. So you can like get into Chicago. Scala Beef was located like just outside of downtown Chicago. It was like a staple. So it was this building, it was a meat packing building for over 100 years. They literally did beef and Italian sausage. They actually supplied all of the Polish sausage and Italian sausage for like Fenway, the Dodgers. They had partnerships with I think 14 MLB teams. So if you went and got like an Italian sausage or you went and got an Italian beef sandwich at a stadium, it was Scala beef was what you got at the stadium. So they did it for like Chicago, Milwaukee, all the everywhere, right? You'd walk in there and imagine like a scene. It's literally a scene from The Sopranos. It's a brick building with two roll up doors with guys coming in and out in butcher shop garb endlessly all day. Truck comes in, truck comes out, truck comes in, truck comes out, right? During my time there, my dad ended up knowing a ton of people. So like, if you think I got a guy, you should meet my father. Like Paul Twingy, his name is Paul Twingy, friend of America. He knows you. He is 1 degree of separation from everybody. I mean, literally anybody you've ever met in your life. It's incredible. We can't go through an airport without Paul knowing 2 people we walk by. It's insane. But we're there. Coach got in with he met some guys who used to play pro ball who were then like running bingo halls and doing things in Indiana. And there would be like cases of baseballs that would show up at our facility. There would be like food that would show up at our facility. And it was because coach would help out these other guys because he would host games at their parks. So he'd host like tournaments, like whether it be Legion, Division I, prospect camps, those kinds of things, right? One day, we walk into Scala Beef. I'm five, maybe 6 years old. We walk into Scala Beef. It's the normal deal. Trucks coming and going. People in white butcher stuff. They're doing the deal. Stuff's going. They're slinging meats. All of a sudden, 2 dudes pull up in Suburban, hop out. Huge Russian dudes, enormous Russian dudes. Walk out in like full suits. I've never seen anybody in a suit there in my entire life, ever. They walk up. They have a big brown bag and they have a suitcase. They set those down. One of the guys grabs them, puts them on a truck, and they leave. And Pat Scala, the owner, goes, "That's our weekly drop off right there." And coach goes, "Okay." So it's like, but this is so Scott, but they were. It's like old school, like old Italian family, like. It's like that stuff exists. Like these are not fake things. Like even all the way up, this would have been, this would have been 2000s, like early 2000s.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's crazy that was like, you hear about it and it's just like a normal thing. It was just, they were like, yeah, that's a weekly drop off right there. And who knows where that was going, wherever that truck was going to, that's where all that, whatever was in those bags was going there. So
that whatever happened to Scala Meatpacking is the first result when you Google Scala Beef.
Mm-hmm. So they shut down, was exactly what he said at the end. It was a quality problem. So one of the sons wanted to played for my dad at Valparaiso University. Very good shortstop. Played, got done. He wanted to take over the business, but then he wanted to change a bunch of stuff. And Pat, the senior who went Pasquale, then went Pat. And Pat was like, "We can't do that this way. Like, it doesn't work. Like, we can't do these things this way." And then actually one of the other scholars is a car salesman here in the Twin Cities. So we get to see him every once in a while. He's got the thickest Chicago accent of all time. He's just like this burly, bald guy. But it closed literally because the quality control of the product couldn't be up to the standard that it wanted to be. So they just shut it down.
See, I think that's interesting. You hear that sometimes.
But they were also,
about things.
Mm-hmm.
And you would think that it would get easier to have quality control over time, not harder. But it seems to be that that's not the case. Like, it just gets more expensive. Or
to do things. I think the big problem too is they were an American run company. Like everything in there was American made, American sourced. So I think it got to the
Yeah.
point where like doing everything that way, the price point probably just got kind of outlandish, or I don't know. It was um my dad was working on it for a while actually with so he's got a buddy who does like the Minnesota State Fair, like they do the bidding to get into the fair, right? Like if you have like a unique food or something you want to get into the fair, they
Hmm.
had a spot for scala beef at the fair, and Pat was like, "Nah, I don't want to do it." He's like, "It'll be a shitty version of what I do." He's like, "I'm not going to do it."
Mm.
And like that could have been, obviously he doesn't care about the money because that
Yeah.
would have been
Yeah.
bonkers bucks. Like even if you sell 40% less than everybody else, you're still going to make $1.7 trillion over a 12-day period because there's so many fat
Yeah.
people walking through that fair, including myself, hammering down. Dude, if there was an Italian beef spot that was actually good, I'd be there on the first day, the third day, and the seventh day. Like I'd be back
Yeah, man.
the entire time. But yeah,
Absolutely.
so there you go, guys.
Well, it
There's
just
a
goes to
little.
show that there's really two types of business people. There is the capitalist and there's the artist,
Mhm.
right? And I think it really shows in restaurants and service businesses.
Yeah.
So what I mean by that is, if you think of a restaurant where it's like a famous restaurant with like a famous chef and it's impossible to get a reservation and it's $1,000 dinner, that's an artist. Like that
Mhm.
restaurant is not going to have 1,000 locations around the country because you're not going to be able to replicate what that guy does.
Mhm.
And or at least maybe you can replicate it, but only underneath his roof by people who he trained himself, right?
Mhm.
And that's why those places get so expensive because that's the only way to grow the business is to get more exclusive. As it becomes more desirable, the supply and demand, the demand grows, but the supply stays the same. So then those places become like super exclusive, fancy, high ticket,
Mhm.
places. And then there's the capitalist where it's like the founder of Panda Express
Yeah, I don't think they're too
owns
worried about
the
quality of Panda
founder of
Express.
But what's ironic is I think people credit him for inventing orange chicken. Like the orange chicken is like a fast food invention. It's an American thing. I do know that. Like orange chicken is not actually Chinese. It's an Americanized version of that.
I got to retract my scoff. I don't know anything about Chinese cuisine, so I take that back.
So
But that just sounds
I
outlandish to me.
I think it might be a Panda Express thing. But that guy owns 100% of it. He's richer than God. He makes like $1 million a month in income
Could
just
you
because of
imagine?
he
Could you
owns all
imagine
those
the
locations.
margin? Could you imagine the margin on Chinese food? It's fried
Yeah, I
chicken
mean,
and rice and
right.
noodles.
And so it's very replicatable, right? And you see with service businesses and gyms and things like that too, where it's like, there's if I go to a place, like Peter Attia,
Mm-hmm.
famous doctor. He
Yep.
takes on like 20 clients. Like he has 20 patients or something like that. And it costs $500,000 a year to have him as your primary care doctor.
Yep.
Because he's the artist, quote unquote, right?
Uh-huh.
Versus like there's some person out there that founded Tria
Yeah.
and North Memorial Health and these big like hospital sort of chains that
Mm-hmm.
exist in our upper Midwest area, like Sanford Health in South Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
Like those are you know those aren't the artist. That's the so but it's really interesting to see because when I look at like a scala beef, I think about it feels like tragic that it just went away. It's like,
It
man, like
was.
you could have, if you got out while the getting was good, while your business was
Yeah.
big, you could have sold it for $150 million, and now you have wealth for generations. You know, um, but that wasn't the perspective of Pat Scala.
Mm-hmm.
Like he never would have done that because he was the artist. He was like, even though they were big, even though they were doing big business and shipping it all over, he was not willing to compromise on what the product was, and he knew, and he probably, I'm sure he got offers to buy the business, and
Oh
I'm sure
yeah.
he told them all to
Yeah.
take a hike
Yep.
because he said, no, you're going to screw it up. You're going to screw up my legacy.
100%.
And that's
But that was him. But that's like That's the classic stubborn Italian dude who's like, it's a family owned, family run business. Like
Mm,
it's small. It got big, but it was meant to be small the whole time. I don't know, but I thought that was a funny. I thought that was a pretty good story. So, and that's a
yeah.
good takeaway though. It is. I don't. I mean, it's the same thing. There's a lot of times where it's the straw that stirs the drink that makes the drink good, more so than what's in the drink itself. Like um, like I'd argue there's some times where, like when we're training guys, like guys come from other facilities when they're training or like even to see me at the clinic, and there's not that there's anything special about like what I do, like there's nothing like all that unique, like I'm not reinventing the wheel or like you aren't really when we're doing what we do, but just having the right energy I think is like one of the biggest things, like having an
Hmm.
environment. We talk about this all the time, but I think it is so imperative, like even your home environment, like the places that you are matter so much to your psyche. Like you have to come to places and be comfortable or at peace, or you have to go to places and be like, okay, there's good energy in here. Like this is
Mm,
like every time you walk in there, you're like, whoa, the energy's good. Like I never walk into the South Side. Like even when I'm tired and I'm like beat up, I never walk into the South Side and I'm like, okay, here we go. I was walking, I'm like, okay, we get to do this now. Like this, there are worse things I could be doing with my time. It's like
hmm.
there's, but that's part of, I think that was part of like the je ne sais quoi of what Scala Beef was. Like you walk into it, it is a South Side location. It's like, it's a Chicago staple. Like everyone knows what that building is. It's all residential around it. And that's the only one on that block that's like that. It had that. It had that. And then
Hmm.
once you remove Pat Scala, once you pull him out, can Mickey or Bobby or one of the other kids, can they come in and do what Pat did? I guess
Hmm.
not. I guess the family was like, you know what, we can't do it. I mean, he still, don't get me wrong, Pat still made. Let's just say that drop wasn't just for where it was going.
Hmm.
Okay, so it's fun, but yeah,
Yeah. Well, maybe that's part of it too. I mean, you never know what's going on
right.
behind the scenes. So maybe some of that dried up, and all of a sudden things weren't sustainable anymore.
I would imagine that mafia moves have decreased with RICO cases. I would imagine that that's not something that is done as often anymore.
Do you
Um,
think do you think organized crime in the traditional sense exists at all anymore? Like I feel like it seems to me that it would be so difficult for anything to really
yeah,
grow into what we see in movies and in history books now.
yeah.
Like an Al Capone type. I guess, you know what? Of course it does. Of course, in the world it does. Like
Oh yeah,
drug cartels.
yeah.
That's what a drug cartel is. That's organized crime.
Human
Um,
trafficking, those are all organized crime. Like all that stuff's
uh,
organized crime.
yeah, that was a dumbass question. Now that I'm actually thinking about
Well,
it,
but you
terrorism.
were, but hold on, but you were posing it in like the traditional sense of like familial,
Yeah,
like that kind of thing.
that.
I do
Yeah.
think there are still families that run certain parts of certain cities for certain things. I do think that happens, but now it's more associated with. It isn't just like organized crime in the sense that like they run a book or they loan shark as much. Because there's
Hmm.
a really good podcast. I'm going to put another podcast on here. It's called The Connect. This guy talks to like modern mobsters and guys who are still in the game. It's pretty wild.
Interesting. Yeah.
But the loan sharking and like running books and doing all those things is just not as normal anymore because you can just sports bet online. You
Hmm.
can Anybody with a pulse can walk into a bank or a credit union and get an extension on a loan. Like you don't even need good credit anymore. They'll just give you $1,000 and then they got you under
Yeah.
the thumb. And then, but it's, I do think I agree. Like at a larger scale, I think it exists a lot more, but at the smaller scale, like where, you know, a certain family runs these 3 blocks and they take care of all the business in those 3 blocks. That's like business. I don't think that really exists as much anymore. That's definitely
No.
not, it's not as fervent.
Uh, well, every neighborhood now is so gentrified with chains and bigger businesses and developers, and like you just don't see that kind of thing anymore, where there's a neighborhood that's just like 5 families, and
Mhm. And a
it's
bunch of locally owned spots that are like everybody knows each other. I'll
yeah.
say this about Graham Anderson, where he lives in St. Paul. He's got a bunch of spots that he goes to that are like family owned
Hmm.
spots where he knows. He's like, yeah, the dad gives me this, and I like it's nice to see him, and I always say hi. I'm like, I miss that because that's how
Yeah.
like Indiana was for me. Like we knew every family that owned all the businesses that the university did business with. We didn't do any business with like Dick's Sporting Goods or like
Yeah.
the wholesalers through Wilson were like the second generation owners of Wilson baseballs, and we got the baseballs from them. We didn't get
Yeah.
it from, but that's, I mean, that's part exactly what you just said, the capitalist versus the artist. The,
Hmm.
the
Yeah.
shift, the paradigm changes over time.
That's what I always liked about St. Paul when I lived there. Like it felt more old. Minneapolis is a lot more like gentrified and corporate,
Yep.
and I always liked like St. Paul still had the corner shop with the owner that's the third generation owner kind of thing.
Yep.
And I always liked that character.
Mhm.
I'm not like overly opinionated one way or the other, but I enjoyed it. I thought it was great. It makes me think of um, the sporting goods stores you mentioned too. It makes me think of the baseball 365s of the world, and I'm
Yep.
glad they still exist.
Yeah. They just moved to
It's
Burnsville. They're like right down the street from my
yeah,
clinic. Yeah.
yeah. Their new store is going to be really cool. They're building a cage in there, so they're
Yeah.
going to be able to you're going to be able to test bats out and stuff, I guess.
Pretty sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited to go see it. I'm gonna get over there soon.
Yeah. Same. I'm
Um,
gonna go for sure.
I was going to mention this earlier. This is kind of bringing it back to something we were discussing a little bit ago with genetics, but I just thought of this. We were talking about this at the training center yesterday. How like you don't really know how a kid's going to turn out as he grows up. We were, congrats to Brady Benson. He committed to go to college baseball. And I was kind of giving him shit. I was looking up old videos of him when he very first started training with me. And he was one of the most awkward tweens ever.
Yeah.
His body type was like hilarious. He was in his growth spurt, and his whole life has been a growth spurt. The kid's huge, but
he's like, what is he, 6'6"? He's so tall.
He's got to be 6'6".
He's so tall.
But I had this video of him throwing a med ball, and he's like, meh, and so that I got into this train of looking up videos of all the other guys that I've trained for years now, which made me feel like weirdly old, by the way, even though I'm only 29. It was like, I've been training some of these kids for legitimately like 7 years. But I found a video of Carl Shavy looks hilarious as like an 11-year-old.
His little pumpkin pie haircut. I remember him.
Oh my God.
And same,
Dude.
Did you pull up any videos of Logan when he first started?
Yes.
The little
I was just going to bring up
shaped Logan.
Yeah, he looks like a little thumb. He looks like a potato. It's so funny. And he moves so badly, And then here he is. He's a Division I athlete, one of the better pitchers that we will maybe ever, and hitters for that matter. I mean, he's one of the best pitchers that we might ever have come out of our program, and he may not even pitch in college. There's a real chance that he goes and just hits. And
Did he show you the video of the sinker? Here's an anecdote of Logan Campbell. It's like, dude, we talked about his fastball metrics, and I was like, we should probably develop a sinker. We tried 4 grips. On the 4th grip, demon sinker. And he goes, I just had to get my hand out in front a little more. And I was like, it's like, you freak.
That's so frustrating.
Yep.
But all these guys, so that's 2 Division II athletes, very good ones, and a Division I athlete. All of these guys looked terrible when they were like 11.
Oh yeah.
Terrible. And then I found this video of another kid. I'm not going to name because I feel like that's unfair. Looks incredible. He's like 11 or 12 years old, and he's throwing in this video, and it's just like this elite, like layback, spiral, spine extension, extension through. His lead leg block is on time, and it's like, and he didn't even play varsity baseball. Wow. I mean, like, you just don't know, man. I mean, right there was the peak of his athletic ability. Like, he peaked at 12.
His cleanest, his most unpolluted self was at that point.
Yeah, and he stayed small. That was part of it. He never got big. And he just, like, meh. And so you just absolutely never know how these things are going to pan out. And I think it's so important for anybody who's, like, working with kids to not like write off the kid who kind of sucks now. Like he's in 6th grade. You don't know, and like, and I was kind of the inverse, by the way. When I was 14 years old, I was God's gift to baseball.
Yeah.
I was unbelievably good relative to the kids I was playing, partially just because I was an early bloomer, like mostly because I was an early bloomer.
Yeah.
I hit puberty when I was 11. You know, I was big. I was 6 feet tall. I weighed 150 pounds.
Yeah.
I could throw the ball 80. I swung a -3 bat 2 years earlier than I had to.
Mhm.
I had a 33-inch -3 bat when I was 13.
Yeah.
And you didn't have to have that until you were 15.
Mhm.
You know, like and then so obviously, and then this is pre BB Core, by the way.
Mhm.
So obviously, just about every ball I hit in the air would go over the fence.
Yep.
You know,
You were the
but
opposite of me. You were the direct inverse of me. I was like this fat kid, but I always played up and I swung like a bigger bat just because it was like, you just did it, right? You didn't really think
yeah,
about it. I remember I was starting to throw harder. Like I always threw really well from behind the plate. Like as a catcher, I threw out like a majority of runners my entire career. Um, I was 16. I looked at my dad. I was like, I'm going to throw 90 before I graduate. And I'm like this fat kid. I'm like 250 pounds, sloppy body, but I'm like kind of athletic. And my dad like kind of chuckled. I did it. But it was like I didn't do it until like the very end, like right when I was about to be 19, like right when I was about to graduate. So I was the inverse of you. Like I grew another inch once I got to college. I didn't get my man muscles until like 5 years ago. Like it took me until my late 20s to like become a man. I was just kind of like this, like I was like Brady Benson. I was like my entire 20s. I was a growth spurt, and now
yeah,
now I finally like feel good. It took me to my
like
30s to like
32
to like
years
feel
old.
nice, like to like everything feels normal. But it is so crazy that it's like even in a setting like, especially in mine, like where my dad was in Division I sports, Division I athletics, like you think, oh, this kid's got a really good chance, and it's like I'm just a dumpy bodied 16-year-old. It's so crazy. It is. I like exactly to your point. If your kid wants it, you got to just want it bad enough. I think is part of
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Well, it makes recruiting hard these days because more and more coaches are kind of looking for more finished products, and you're not really getting recruited off of quote projectability anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, you can, but it's less common than it used to be for sure. Coaches want you to be ready to come in and compete right away, and if you're going to be a kid who's going to grow 2 more inches after college, after you start college, like it's just kind of a bummer, you know.
Yeah.
And there's not much you can really do about that other than just maybe go to JUCO.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like I think Brady Benson, who just committed, like I still think he's got another like 4 or 5 miles an hour laying on the plate because he still doesn't even move that well yet. He's still
right.
growing into his body. Like he came in. You remember the other day when we were both in the weight room and we are like, you actually look kind of like developed for the first time, and he's 6'6". He weighs
Well, it's in the
235
face.
pounds. Yeah.
With kids, it's oftentimes in the face where you've got this giant toddler. Like you can tell that like his face still looks so young. Whereas some other kids, you look at their face and you're like, you can tell that, their jaw's kind of squared out. Maybe they've started growing facial hair. Maybe it's just something about the way that their face looks. You're like, okay, you're kind of a finished product physically there, know? And then others, like Brady Benson, Jack Nicklaus comes to mind, a guy that we've worked with, who got to college and then continued to kind of grow and develop and is probably still growing and developing.
He still is like a gangly, like weirdly shaped. Love that boy. Hopefully he's listening.
He'll be like 25 when he's fully done for sure.
And he'll take it.
And he'll probably be an awesome athlete at that point.
He'll be a killer. He'll be a town ball all-star at that age. He'll be so good.
Yeah. He would love hearing you say that if he's listening. When he hears that. But yeah, I mean, it just really goes to show like you just do not know, and the only thing you can really do is just stay in the game, do your best, work hard, train, practice, lift weights, just participate to the best of your ability and see where the cards fall.
100%.
It's really hard to know for sure, and then there's a lot of luck. You got to get in front of the right guy at the right time, and you got to like, if a ball bounces one way or the other, sometimes that can build momentum in one way or another. And And it's hard to know. It's hard to know.
Sounds like life.
Yeah.
That's why sports
Yeah.
are so great.
That's why sports
Because
are
it's
great.
life. It's life. You got anything else you want to hammer on, pal?
No, I don't know, man. I think we should wrap there. We covered a lot. Covered gene editing. We covered organized crime, and we covered some sports performance. So
Sounds
I
like a
think,
normal day for us. This sounds like a
yeah,
regular day.
yeah. I think that's a good little 45-minute episode.
All right, we'll catch you guys later. Bye.
All right.